Okay, I have 12 noon, so I know everybody has a busy schedule. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today for session 4 of the Refocus and Rebuild webinar series. It's focused on helping Virginia businesses reopen in a COVID-19 world. My name is Sandy Ratliff. I am with Virginia Community Capital. And if you're not familiar with us, we are a community development financial institution that's providing lending, investing, and community innovation services throughout Virginia. We are happy to partner with the Virginia Small Business Virginia Small Business Development Center Network, Gen Ed, University of Virginia's College at Wise Office of Economic Development, and the Southwest Virginia Alliance for Manufacturing to offer this series. This is a 13-week webinar series focused on helping business owners and leaders build skills and knowledge to manage and grow, as well as share resources that can help Virginia businesses move forward following the pandemic. If you noticed in your reminder emails that you've been receiving about this session, I provided a link to access a variety of templates and a guidebook that help you and that you can use to refer to moving forward. Our objective throughout this whole series is to help you develop a resiliency plan to be prepared should another pandemic or crisis hit. Now, before we get started and I announce and welcome our presenter, I wanted to note that in order to keep this webinar flowing and to stay within our 1-hour goal, we have muted everyone. However, we want to hear from you. And please, if you have a question for either our presenter or any of our partners that are joining in today, please post those in the Q&A section, and we will address those at the end of the presentation. Today, I am happy to have Sam Wolford. Sam is the Regional Growth Manager and Trade Adjustment Assistance Program Manager with Gen Edge, who's going to lead our session. I have personally known Sam for many, many years, and I know that he has about his passion for helping business and industry flourish in Virginia. Sam is going to be focusing on inventory, helping you to identify revenue, supply chain, recreating your inventory stock, and many more. Again, this is all part of this whole series and helping you develop a resiliency plan. So, Sam, thank you and welcome, and so glad to have you here today.
Well, thank you, Sandy. I appreciate that introduction, and that was one too many minis. While I'm getting ready to share my screen, I do want to thank all of the other partners that have been a part of putting together and making this series a reality. That this really is intended to help the businesses and the communities throughout Virginia as we do face additional disasters and challenges in the future. So I've shared my screen. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes, it's up.
Well, what I'm going to be talking about today is inventory and supply chain management during a disaster. And, you know, inventory and supply chain, there's been a major business impact through those two things as we've gone through this disaster. Inventory is one of the biggest opportunities to improve efficiency and profit. It's also one of the biggest opportunity spaces for guarding against uncertainties. And, you know, we certainly had the idea that, you know, there was a risk that eventually a pandemic would hit, but we didn't know the full scale of the uncertainty that would come with it, with the global shutdowns and the global challenges that happened. And with inventory, you know, cash is really key. You know, effective management and optimization of inventory supply chains really to keep your cash in your hands before, during, and after the crisis. That's the goal. So, as we've gone through this process, we've seen a number of challenges that businesses have experienced. And how many of you all have seen things like this? Sorry, we're closed due to COVID. Starting in March here, there was a lot of that. And I think we've learned a few things as we've come through this crisis. The first thing that I think that we've learned is that we need to better prepare for future crises. Things like this are going to happen. They're probably going to continue to happen. They're not going to go away. So we need to be better prepared. Secondly, risk mitigation, understanding the risk associated with these type of events, any disaster, and being able to mitigate those risks beforehand is absolutely critical to helping businesses to be able to sustain themselves through an event like the one we've been going through. I've heard a lot of conversations and thought a lot about the various businesses and industries that have gone through this, that have had to close, that have had to deal with the challenges associated with this disaster. And one really sticks out in my mind is possibly one that has been impacted the greatest, and that's the restaurant and food service industries. When you start thinking about, what they had to deal with as governors across the U.S. began closing their states, closing restaurants and food services to customers, those food service industries, they had stock, they had inventory, and that inventory had a limited life shelf. It wasn't going to last forever. So we saw a number of them step up and really do some pretty amazing things. Some of them, they donated their inventory, their perishables, to things like food banks, to soup kitchens to feed the hungry, to help feed frontline responders and emergency personnel who are trying to help and respond to the COVID-19 emergency and crisis. So those restaurants, they pivoted to try to help with their inventory. They didn't realize that fairly quickly there was going to be another opportunity, and that was the opportunity of providing services through either delivery or pickup, providing the opportunity for people to come and get the food directly from them. And so once they lost or gave away that inventory up front, so they didn't wind up losing it to rot or some other issue with that limited lifespan, they had to buy and restock that inventory. So not only did they lose the money associated with that inventory up front, they had to expend additional money in order to ramp back up and be able to provide services again. So inventory impacts are significant whenever you go through disasters and situations like this. There was another industry, and it was very interesting as I was looking through and preparing for this. The fashion industry had some pretty significant impacts. In January of 2020, China, the virus was beginning to spread throughout China. China started closing things down. They completely closed down their factories. So all of a sudden, retail establishments in other parts of the world were starting to see impacts. Products were being delayed. Products were not getting delivered. And as China started reopening, U.S. and European retail establishments were in the process of shutting down. So as the factories were ramping up and they were starting to produce their products to get into the retail establishments, their customer wasn't there to purchase from them. So both the factories and the retail establishments, they had significant business impacts early on in this pandemic. But there were 6 steps that some of them took in response to those events. But each one of them, they came with their own individual challenges. the first step that many retail establishments took had to do with canceling orders. As soon as they saw that, yeah, we're going to have to shut down, this is going to impact our ability to provide our customers with our products from our store, they started canceling orders. And so that had a direct and immediate impact on the factory orders that were coming. And so it's pretty amazing. Just in January, the textile and apparel imports to the U.S. from China dropped by 31%. That's just unbelievable. It's amazing that it dropped that much. That had a huge impact on the factories in China. But some of our businesses, some of the retail establishments were able to pivot, so they decided that they would go to selling more online, and they pivoted to selling more online. In fact, with everyone being kind of in their homes, that online retail actually increased dramatically. Online retail between January 27th and February 23rd experienced an increase, a revenue growth of 52%. That's incredible. That's amazing. So all of a sudden, you have your retail establishments now. They now have a way to get their products into their customers' hands. So they're looking at, okay, how can we get back and get our factories providing us with those products? Another thing that happened with some of the factories, as well as with other retail establishments that may have had overstock because their doors were shut, because they didn't move to an online model, they began to push some of their goods to off-price channels, to some of the off-price channel stores. And the challenge that really came with that was, what was the priority going to be from the off-price stores to purchase goods? And did they actually have the ability to get those things online like the regular retailers did? Another thing that happened is some retailers, some fashion industry businesses, they held on to their stock. They either kept it in their warehouses, they kept it in the backs of their retail stores, or they held on to what they had and they were just trying to hunker down and get through. They didn't know how many weeks they were going to be closed. They didn't know what was going to happen. So they were unable to really anticipate, so they just hunkered down in place. And that created challenges in and of itself. Another thing that happened is there were some collaborations that took place. In the shoe retailers industry, there are a couple of different associations. And those associations actually were able to come together and identify certain businesses, certain retailers that may have had a gap in inventory that they needed to gain and get their hands on, and other retailers that had excess inventory because the shoppers weren't coming into their shops. And so they were able to balance that inventory and get it where it needed to be to continue to get those products into the hands of their customers. And the last thing, we've already mentioned this with the restaurant industry. A number of retailers or a number of producers actually were willing to donate to a good cause. There were a number of shoe companies, for example, that donated shoes to emergency service personnel. For example, Crocs and Morel. They donated shoes to nurses, to doctors, to emergency response individuals. So they were able to donate those things. And there was some benefit from that. It may not have been the same level of benefit that they were able to get from selling the products, but there was some benefit. They could actually write it off on their taxes as a gift. So they were able to do that. Plus, they could use it as a marketing effort. There's something called the goodwill halo effect. And so when customers see that the businesses are providing those products to frontline emergency service providers who are responding, they have this desire to help those producers as well. And so it actually could turn into a marketing opportunity for them, and it really did. So that actually worked out fairly well for them. So the question becomes, how do you prepare for inventory management for a crisis. If you look at the black line here in this graph, you can see the typical response to crisis. The blue line is the demand, the customer demand. The typical response is that you're running a little bit above the necessary inventory for your particular market. You have a little bit of overstock, but then the crisis happens, and well, you think, how long is this going to last? Let's just kind of wait and see what happens. Let's kind of stay on target where we were, and so your inventory continues to go up, and you create larger overstock. Well, during that same time, what happens? What happened with the COVID-19? You had challenges associated with your employees. Challenges of, okay, someone came in and had COVID, and all of a sudden you have to figure out how to, get those other employees quarantined for the next 14 days. You had issues where, how do you make sure you get the right spacing between your employees as they do their job, that social distancing that's required. So you had all these distractions that went with it. So maybe you're not watching as carefully as you should what's happening on the sales side, on the demand side. And so you go ahead and you start ramping your inventory down, but you're not ramping down at the same rate as the demand is ramping down. So you're creating greater and greater and greater overstock. So you continue to ramp down, not paying so much attention to what's happening on the demand side, and it starts coming back up. Well, you don't realize it till a little bit later, and all of a sudden your inventory is dropping below the demand, and you come up with a shortage in being able to respond to what your customers want, what your customers need. So, what is it that we can do? What is it that we can do before the crisis to reduce the inventory? What is it that we can do during the crisis to respond more quickly? And what is it that we can do in the aftermath of the crisis to make sure that we have the inventory we need to respond to our customers' demands? First of all, there's several things that you can do before the crisis. You can measure your performance, and you can make sure you have very clear performance objectives as they relate to the amount of stock that you're producing compared to your demand. You can manage your inventory based on risk, and risk is something that really has to be taken into account as you look at your supply chain and how you're providing your products into your markets. If possible, you can reduce the number of references or offers that you have. You can focus on increasing your flexibility, being better at being responsive. So during the crisis, what can you do? First of all, you may want to reduce your supplies and your inventory as quickly as possible. If you remember what I said at the beginning, cash is king. Well, cash on hand can be critical to a business's survival as they go through disasters or as they go through various crises that present themselves. You can review your prices to really support the demand and limit the decline in the demand. So you can make adjustments to your pricing. You can review your product mix and make sure your product mix is what's needed in the markets that you're serving. In the aftermath of crisis, what can you do? You can quickly revise your forecast upwards as quick as you possibly can. Pay attention to what's happening. Don't allow the distractions that are going on. And I'm not saying those distractions aren't important. They were very important. But if you're not able to survive the overstock and the stock out conditions, and ultimately your business falls apart, those other things really, they have to become secondary. Supply your customers as quickly as you possibly can. Don't try to hold on to stock that you have. Try to get it out there to your customers. And of course, maintain a sound management process as you're going through your recovery. Don't overreact. Don't underreact. Try to maintain a balance that works for you and works for your company. So the goal is to have a response that looks like the green line here. It's not ever going to be perfect. There's always going to be layers of risk. There's always going to be some uncertainty there. But if you take those steps, if you start really looking and thinking about it early on, before it begins, if you respond quickly as the crisis takes place and you match up with what your demand is, and you maintain that focus on demand and understand exactly what's happening with that, then you can make it through, and you can create an inventory that reflects the market demand for you. So what are with those three steps, they will help you to avoid some inventory management disasters, 4 of them specifically. One is tying up your capital. The challenge of success and of good economic conditions is a lot of times businesses will look at that and they'll say, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to buy some inventory. I'm going to make sure I have some stuff on hand. I'm going to put some stuff back just in case. And a lot of times that reaction ties up that needed cash, that needed capital in inventory whenever a disaster or a crisis hits. Stockouts. What can you do to make sure that you don't run out of stock? It is key and imperative that you actually balance your demand with your production, balance your supplies with your production, and making sure that even though you don't have real-time inventory insight, you maintain some level of safety buffer, understanding and knowing that that really is a balancing act. You want to avoid back orders. You really don't want to be in a position where you allow a customer to order something that you can't produce or you can't provide within the lead times that they're looking for. So you want to focus on making sure you're communicating with your customers in a way that they understand timing and lead times and your ability to get products to them. And you want to avoid things like undeliverables. And I heard several times where various producers had challenges with undeliverables during the COVID-19 crisis, because some of the trucking industry, some of the logistics companies weren't willing to take products into hotspot areas where there were high numbers of COVID-19 cases. So those ultimately became undeliverables, and they wound up sitting on that stock until those numbers went down enough and the logistics companies actually caught up with the businesses. So, you want to avoid undeliverables. I think I went a little bit too far. So let's talk about another example of how inventory control issues can dramatically impact a major company. They're not immune from these types of things. So with Walmart, back in 2011, they realized that they had a challenge of keeping things on the shelf. As well as I do that they have a model of, okay, we want just-in-time products on our shelves. We don't want to be holding stock in the back room. We want to do our best to make sure that we're turning that stock as soon as we get it. But they weren't. So, they kept seeing and realizing, hey, we've got open spaces. We got gaps in our shelves, and that shelf space equals value. It equals money to them. So in 2013, they really looked at, okay, how can we turn this around? How can we change this? That year, their total misplaced goods, or goods that weren't on the shelf, that shelf space cost to them, was $3 billion. $3 billion in inventory turn that could have happened that didn't happen. And I know that you all have seen the same thing as we've gone through this COVID-19, going into Walmart more and more often, seeing their shelves not stocked. Well, maybe it's not a supply chain issue. I know back in 2013, 2014, it turned out it wasn't a supply chain issue. They actually had the products in their store, but they didn't have enough employees stocking those products. So the products weren't making it out to the shelf. And they actually were building and building and building stock that wasn't necessary. So, you know, even large corporations can go through challenges associated with stock out and inventory control. Certainly anytime, but definitely during a crisis, a disaster, like we've been going through. So, you know, let's think about an action plan to reduce your inventory before a crisis. What's one thing that you can do? You know, you probably should look back and analyze, you know, what happened before the last crisis you went through. You don't know whether that crisis was created by a member of your supply chain, or whether that crisis was created by, you know, some other event that happened within your facility, or a natural disaster. I know that with Hurricane Sandy, for example, up in New York, there were some pretty significant impacts on supply chain whenever that happened. That created a crisis for a number of businesses across the U.S. in being able to access the products they needed for their particular production processes. So, you know, look at what's happened in the past, try to understand it, but don't rely too much on it. We'll look at another point here shortly that actually is going to tell you, you know, historical data is good, but it only goes so far. Second thing you can do is reduce your inventory by 10 to 20%, primarily focusing on the risky products that you have. If you're holding stock of risky products, look there first to reduce that inventory and try to limit your financial exposure through inventory by reducing those risky products. Increase your flexibility as much as possible. The more flexible your business is, the more you're able to adapt to situations, the better you're going to be able to respond to recover from a disaster or a crisis. Try to reduce your payment delays. You know, some companies will carry payments for their customers, you know, 60, 90, 120 days sometimes. You know, that can be a challenge, especially during a crisis. You want to keep, like I said in the beginning, you want to keep as much cash in your hands as you possibly can. Set inventory priorities and stick to them. You know, in your inventory processes, you know, it's easy to say, oh, well, we can get a deal on this. Let's buy a bunch of this. Or we, you know, shipping costs aren't going to, you know, exist on this because we're shipping something else in. Let's do a lot of purchasing here and bring additional products in. But moving back and forth between those things tends to create inventory that is, you know, overstock for you, overstock for what you're trying to do, and it ties up your capital in that inventory. And the last thing is raise awareness throughout your business. You know, try to help everyone within the business understand how important, you know, inventory is to the business, and maintaining and making sure that you maintain an optimized inventory so that your business can be more efficient. If your employees are looking for ways to look out for the business, to help the business, and to help that bottom line, that profitability, that cash flow, then certainly you know, that's going to be a huge benefit to you as you move forward. So, you know, there are 4 ways to balance inventory management with emergency preparedness, and you know, those 4 ways are first, you know, start by factoring in inventory variability. You know, it's difficult to factor in variability because, you know, that word in and of itself seems like, you know, how can you possibly do that? But it goes really beyond ordering to avoid stockouts. You're looking at sourcing. You're looking at, you know, how can we make sure when disasters or emergencies occur, those high demand products that you may need that are often out of stock, that are often unavailable during those situations, that you actually have those on hand versus the others. So try to understand how much you use where and how you use it. Secondly, stop basing your inventory forecast solely on historical models. It kind of flies in the face of the previous one. You do want to look at that history. You want to look at the previous crises. But you also want to, understand and focus on the fact that, things are very fluid. And for most businesses, their inventory needs, their production needs change a great deal from year to year. And so, if you base everything on those historical models, sometimes you'll wind up coming up short. 3, maintain good levels of double duty inventory. It's very important that if there's a way for you to utilize inventory or stock in more than one way within your business, that you do so. But if you're doing that, you need to make sure that you keep those on hand. I'll give you a very specific example of something that's now a double duty inventory that perhaps was not before, but that you really have to try to work hard to maintain good levels of now. For those who are in the manufacturing industry, in construction industry, in automotive industry, a lot of those required utilizing and having masks. Different types of masks, from N95s to ventilators to other things, they required having those masks on hand. Now, those masks actually do serve double duty, because you don't only need them out on the production line. In many cases, they're required in the front office. They're required in the conference room or in the boardroom. So that's a double duty inventory, and making sure that you keep those high levels of inventory is important in balancing and managing your inventory during an emergency. The fourth thing to helping you to balance inventory is optimize your current inventory. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to optimize your current inventory? And it all boils down to really balancing the amount of working capital that's tied up in inventory with the service level goals that you have across your inventory and across your production. But really, it's all about competitive advantage. Being able to be in a position where you have the advantage against your competitors. And optimizing your current inventory can lower your cost. It can improve your delivery, your lead times. It can increase your quality. And it ultimately gives you, as a business, a competitive edge for dealing with challenges such as the crisis that we're in now. So, thinking about businesses and how they are dealing with and trying to optimize. I have an example of a business that I've worked with that I feel like really was, they were going through a struggle with this COVID-19, and the way they handled it was just really perfect. It really was a way to truly deal with some of the challenges that many businesses may have faced as they've gone through this. This particular business had connections to Europe, and they saw what was happening in Europe related to the virus. And so as they saw the increase in cases in the United States, they chose to close up their business for 2 weeks. They were going to take it 2 weeks at a time, see what happened after the first 2 weeks, and then go from there. Well, during that 2-week period, they got a call from their customer, and their customer was in desperate need of their products, So they call their people back in, they ramp back up their production, they start producing the products, they ship them out, they get them to the customer, and over the next few weeks, they start seeing those customer orders decline again. because the customer was just now beginning to feel the impacts of COVID where they were. So, what would you do? To me, that's a real predicament. All of a sudden, you've ramped back up, you've got your people back to work, you've brought people back into your business doing jobs that that maybe even paying less than they were making on unemployment with the additional funding that was provided. And how in the world do you manage that and keep morale up and keep your business running and moving forward? So what they did was they actually reached out to their customer, and they were able to come up with a deal where they would produce product, and they would be producing it over the next several months. They would store it back. They would keep it on site at that business's facility, and the customer would actually commit to purchase those products by December. So it kind of allowed them to spread out the impact of that decline in their customer orders over a number of months. And that customer will get what they need in those products, and the company will be able to absorb the impact that was coming from the COVID-19 by managing the way that they produce and keep their inventory. That was a collaboration that I think was absolutely fantastic, a fantastic example of how important communication can be in dealing with the challenges that you face in your supply chain and as a part of a supply chain. So, why would we want to focus on optimizing a supply chain? Why is that important? That if you look at typical and traditional areas of improvement with businesses, with manufacturers, with other places, it's really been about optimizing your operations, finding places where you can continuously improve your operations, process improvement, efficiency gains. That's where we've traditionally focused. But that's only 15 to 20% of the actual value within your business. The biggest part of the value in most businesses is in the supply chain. So that's where the opportunities are. 60+% of the value where you can actually have an impact on your bottom line, on your profitability, exists within the supply chain. If you optimize your supply chain like you do your operations, if you create those efficiencies within your supply chain like you do your operations, how much benefit can you and your business gain from that? And, ultimately, there are several areas of focus within the supply chain optimization and the supply chain improvement. These, run from visibility. Obviously, visibility is the most important one, to fluctuating customer demand, inventory coordination, the availability that you have to workforce. These are all cascading variables that really provide a number of interconnected opportunity spaces for optimizing your supply chain. So, there are supply chain dependencies. Now, what do those dependencies look like? Understanding those dependencies, they are where they are, when they occur. It's important in optimizing the supply chain and understanding what your true cost of supplies are. To not recognize that those dependencies are there, it really makes you vulnerable to unpleasant surprises that can happen that actually can drive up your costs. An example of a dependency that is separated by several steps is if you have a product, right, that you use, that product may be produced by someone else. If it's sequential, if the dependency is sequential, ultimately you're buying directly from them. That dependency is just to them. If there are other products that they're putting together to produce the product that you're going to use in your production or that you're going to ultimately provide to the customer, there could be several steps of separation in that dependency. So if something happens on down in tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 of your supply chain, that can have an impact and a ripple effect all the way through the supply chain and ultimately impact you. So, the outcomes, yeah, they could be predicted. Maybe you can look at what's happening in the world, you can understand, but they also may be, something that you don't see, something that surprises you. It's the unforeseen outcomes ultimately that create those vulnerabilities within the supply chain. Common dependencies are materials. I work a lot with a lot of different fabricators. I work a lot with machine shops, with companies that utilize steel. Well, through this COVID-19, there definitely has been an impact on the steel industry. We've seen some of that with some of their supply not being available whenever they needed it. Them having certain types of steel or certain products that they couldn't get their hands on for 4, 5, 6 weeks maybe. That could be an immediate or a sequential impact, or it could wind up being something that's separated by several steps. But material use and that availability of the material, that dependency is quite common. Quality and design. Whenever you're trying to improve your quality, you understand that quality is always tied to the design of the products. How well do you know your suppliers, those who are further down in your supply chain, and their ability to meet your design requirements? It may appear on the surface that they are, but if you don't have that visibility down to them, you may not be able to control ultimately the quality of that component that's going into your product. What about your infrastructure support? We've already talked about logistics and the trucking industry and how that really can have an impact on what it is that you're trying to accomplish in getting your products to your customers. So lessons that we can learn from supply chain system dynamics. One, with limited system visibility, small events, they can cause really large reactions. And ultimately, they can cause chaos if you're not prepared for it. The system structure determines the behavior within the system. So if the system is structured in silos and you don't have that ability to look through and have that visibility through your supply chain, it will impact the whole system's performance in getting products to market. To change the system, ultimately, you really have to change the structure. You've got to be open to that visibility yourself, and your suppliers have to become open to that visibility themselves. And you've got to work to collaborate to deal with the real root cause of the issue, the real challenge, not just trying to deal with the symptoms of either late arrivals of out-of-stock components or inventory. You've got to deal with the system, not just the symptoms. So before changing the structure, you really do need to have a sound strategy. There are some questions that you can ask, some things that you can think about in strategic sourcing and strategic suppliers. One, multiple sourcing. Is there the opportunity to actually source the products you need from multiple places? And does that actually mitigate a risk for you of having a single supplier? It may be that one supplier is a little higher than the other, but it may very well be worthwhile for you to purchase some to maintain that relationship and to have that communication with a secondary source. What about proximity sourcing? Proximity can be a real challenge. A number of products come from overseas, and when storms hit, when natural disasters hit, when things like this COVID hit, it can create a big impact on that supply chain. But what if you were able to find something that was within a reasonable proximity to your facility. That really lends itself to understanding that total cost of your supply chain. And those are some things that, that we work with businesses on. What about your make versus buy decisions? I had a company that I've worked with for a while, and they had a make versus buy decision that they needed to make. They had products. Some were very good margins, others were minimal margins. And those products that were very good margins, their limitation was their workforce. They didn't have enough people to make more and more and more of those. So one of the things that they considered and that they looked at was, okay, is there someone that we can contract with to provide us with these low margin products? And it actually be a margin that's acceptable to them. So looking at things like overhead and the cost associated with doing business, they were actually able to locate a supplier for those products and then move the workforce that they had committed to those previous products to working on the higher margin products. So, it really was a win-win. But that never would have happened if they had not been really looking at and considering their supply chain and how they use that supply chain. What about purchase quantities and buffer sizing? Those are all things that need to be taken into account as you're going through and looking at your supply chain and your inventory control systems. What about directly buying from a supplier versus buying from a distributor? Which one's better? If you buy directly from the supplier, how much are you going to save? But how much are you going to pay in shipping, where a distributor may, be able to get it to you at a lower cost if you include the shipping into the equation? Or what about the risk associated with shipping that product? There may be risk that aren't accounted for as you are looking at your supply chain. So ultimately, informed decisions, they really require understanding of the supply chain. So some final recommendations. Look and plan to develop an extended supply chain strategy with your partners. That doesn't happen accidentally. That has to be intentional. Build trust. Demonstrate and experience the benefits of communication. Enhance the desire of your partners to improve the network. Help them to see the value of improving lead time, on-time delivery, quality, total cost understanding of the supply chain, and the risk management associated with it. And ultimately, seek out experts to help. They can help identify system bottlenecks and constraints. They can help address your supply variation and help you to understand the challenges with that. They can help you to map supply chain dependencies and variations. They can help identify and develop strategies to mitigate the supply chain risk. Help you understand your value at risk in terms of the disruptions and the probability of it happening and the impacts. And they can identify your total supply chain cost, helping you to understand all the inputs, all the factors that are involved in that. So I think we're about to the end. I really like this comment. I think it reflects very much what we started out talking about, how important it is to have cash. Warren Buffett said, cash combined with courage in time of crisis is priceless. And that really is the case. So that's all I have for today. If you have any questions or if you want to contact me, here's my information. I'll be more than happy to help you in any way that I can. So thank you, Sandy, and back to you.
Well, thanks, Sam. What a great presentation, and I know I learned a whole lot, and I'm sure everyone that joined the call learned a lot. Right now, we don't have any questions. If you do have questions for Sam, please post those in the Q&A section. But I have a quick question for you, Sam. What do you think is maybe the top 3 things that you all have seen with clients during this COVID that's totally caught them off by surprise when it relation to inventory control?
I think that probably the first thing that I would say would be the lack of access to their needed supplies. You know, and the change in the logistics associated with that. For example, you know, some of our businesses, they, you know, had a particular supplier that supplied them with steel. Well, the change in that supplier's process, they no longer would deliver that steel to them, so they had to figure out how to get that steel from their supplier or move to another supplier. That's the first thing. Probably the second thing was how quickly the orders, the change occurred after the crisis in the number of orders that they were getting. You know, it happened much more quickly than was originally anticipated. And so they were kind of caught a little bit off guard with that. And probably the third thing that I would say related to supply chain was, you know, them getting their products to their customers. You know, some of their customers, you know, they wanted products now, but then they didn't want their products now. So it was kind of a back and forth, and that uncertainty of what was happening with their customers translated into uncertainty with them.
Sam, we don't have a question, but we do have a comment from Carissa Hava. I don't have a question, but this was great information. So I want to give you that feedback. I'm going to ask any of my partners that are on with me if they have a question. Sam, it looks like they're all very talkative today.
They are.
Which is unlike these folks. I think it's the putting them on film or on the video screen that's got them scared. But I hope that folks took lots of notes and will actually sit down and start working on their resiliency plan. And the other folks that are on here with us, partners, Margie Douglas, Mandy Archer, and Cindy Fields with the Small Business Development Centers, they are all in your communities here in Southwest Virginia, but they are located throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. I recommend that you reach out to them, and they would be happy to help you in establishing and working on your resiliency plan. And don't forget that is in the link to download that template is in your emails that you received from me. Any other comments or suggestions, Sam, before we close the session?
Well, I certainly do want to thank everyone for being on the webinar today. We appreciate your participation, and I appreciate all the partners and all the effort that's gone into making these events happen. It is a series. It is ongoing. Hopefully, it will be a great value to all of the businesses across the Commonwealth. So thank you.
We're doing kind of like your client did with their customer. Is we're working together, collaborating to help. And what our goal is all of us is to help our businesses through this pandemic. But thank you, Sam, for your time and your expertise you shared this afternoon. I'm sure Sam will send me the PowerPoint, and we will get that to each of our attendees today, as well as we will upload. This was recorded, and we will upload that and provide a link that you can access that as well. And for everyone that joined us, thank you for taking time out of, I know, your busy schedules to, if I had a hat on, I would take it off to say good job for taking the time to learn about new opportunities, new skills. That's how we all grow as professionals, is taking that step and learning something new. So again, we will reshare the link and the templates later on this afternoon. I hope you'll make plans to join us next Thursday as we focus on a specific topic that I think is important for every business, and that is employee and diversity planning, and that will be led by Matthew Davidson with Baker Donaldson. which is a firm out of Johnson City, Tennessee. But please make plans to join us. And again, if you got value out of this, when I share the link and the information with you, share that with another business associate or supplier or manufacturer or someone that you know that could have value of that. That would help us, move the chain as the supply chain is help other people access this. So again, I thank you for joining us and wish everyone a great weekend. And I look forward to seeing you next Thursday at noon. Have a good day.